Good afternoon, everyone. I'm John Laria, Chair of the Baltimore City Planning Commission. This is the March 13th, 2025 meeting, apparently also meeting number 2069. There are other YouTube videos from early ones. Seated next to me is our Planning Director and Executive Secretary of the Commission. Mr. Executive Secretary, would you please call the roll?
Yes, I believe Robin Allen is attending virtually. Thank you. The Honorable John Bullock.
Present.
Christine Griffin.
Present.
Talib Horn.
Present.
Claudia Jolin.
Present.
Doug McCoach is not present. Justin Williams.
Present.
Eric Stevenson.
Present.
And John Laria.
Present. Quorum is here, yes? Okay. The next item is the approval of the minutes from the prior meeting, which were circulated to the commissioners. Is there a motion to approve those minutes?
So moved.
It's been moved by Councilman Bullock. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by the Vice Chair. All those in favor, aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. Motion carries. Minutes are approved. I'm just going to take 1 minute of a personal privilege here, if I may, just to make a couple of quick remarks. I thought I would make them at the last meeting, but there were a number of absences, and I wanted to make sure that I was actually going to come back for a second meeting. So for better or worse, I am here for my second meeting. I just wanted to say quickly a couple of things. One, it really is for me an honor to serve on this commission with each of you. I'm speaking to the commissioners. I've really been inspired by the time I've spent practicing before the commission, and in the couple of meetings I watched you on the CIP before I was actually a member, by the depth and breadth and diversity of experience. Everybody's really bringing something to the table. It's very impressive, and I expect to learn a lot from each of you. I have a lot to learn. I've also been watching the staff for a long time, and in the last few weeks, I've really come to appreciate the professionalism and the competence and the diligence of our staff even more. You see it in the work, the presentations, Mr. Tiso, Ms. Pernillam, and others, both senior and junior. So it's really, we have a great staff here, and I'm looking forward to working with them. And of course, Director Ryer, who I've known for a long time and who does a terrific job. So I hope you'll be patient with me and give me as much insight and as you can. I also wanted to say one quick thing about the work and the mission. At my confirmation hearing and in meetings with the mayor and others, it's clear to me that everybody shares one mega goal here, and that goal is to be pro-growth, right? Everybody talks about being pro-growth. We want the city to grow. That means something different sometimes to different people, but everybody wants us to grow, and that means both good planning and good development projects. And as I said during the confirmation, that does not mean a green light for everything that comes before the city council or certainly the planning commission. That's not what I'm saying. We are in many ways a regulatory body. This is a regulatory process, and we're governed by law. We're governed by policy. We're governed by practical judgment and legal standards that really apply. And we're going to make sure, at least I'm going to do my best to make sure that those standards are met. And of course, we also have to provide for, and we will provide for, a robust and meaningful input from the community, including opponents who will have every right to be heard and will express their views as they always have. And I know the commission will consider that. But I really do think that part of our mandate is to grow the city. And to me, that's kind of the guidepost here, the North Star, whatever phrase you want to use. And I want to take that seriously. I want to work with the staff. I want to work with each of my fellow commissioners and all the other departments, sister departments, and stakeholders to achieve that in a way that's ambitious, that's equitable, that's inclusive. But I'm going to keep coming back to that theme. And I think that's the filter that I intend to use as best I can when we're talking about opportunities, is how is this going to help the city grow? And how is it going to help us thrive? So I'm really excited to be here. I really am humbled by the opportunity and to be able to work with a commission that has been working together for quite a while. So thank you for allowing me to parachute in like this, and I'm going to do the best I can. So I would just thank you, and I just wanted to make those few remarks at the outset. With that, I'm going to turn to the consent agenda. On the consent agenda, we have The first item is CIP transfers. You've had an opportunity to review those, Commissioners. The CIP transfers are from the Board of Estimates meeting of March the 5th. I think, Mr. Secretary, that's the only set of CIP transfers.
Correct.
Is there a motion to approve the Board of Estimates March 5th CIP transfers?
Mr. Chair, before we get to a motion, this is where I usually do a bit of grandstanding. And on item number 2, it's not today going to be about the fact that the Board of Estimates has already approved this before our vote. It's not going to be about the issue of cost escalation, which we've heard about before. It's not even going to be about the fact that this $7.5 million is more than we are awarding to entire agencies such as BDC in the capital budget today, but simply about the fact that this is $7.5 million in unspent money that was on the shelf and that it's not visible or considered in our capital budget process over the past 2 months when we're prioritizing projects and making tough decisions about budget allocations. Nowhere on the sheet does it say DPW has $7.5 million and who knows how much more in unspent funds. And that needs to be part of the equation and the conversation if we're going to make responsible choices. And I know we've talked about this a bit, and Sarah in her presentation has addressed strides that we're taking towards gaining that transparency, and so I continue to appreciate that, but this is just too clear of an example not to point out, to illustrate to everyone who maybe didn't understand what a big issue this is. Thank you.
Thanks, Mr. Vice Chair. I've also talked about it with the staff. I understand that improvements are being made in the process, and I don't think any more needs to be said today unless you're looking for a specific response. But I know you just wanted to get on the record this continuing concern, which I think is a very valid one. Did you need to say anything, Ms. Perrinel? Okay, it's fine. No. I didn't want to deprive you of the opportunity.
I would say I recognize the Vice Chair's point. I think this one from DPW is like the water utility, sort of its own thing. So it's not as, this one is an instance where there's sort of a closed system that isn't impacting the rest of the enterprise. But I think the point is well taken. Generally, that how we do the CIP and the tracking of unspent funds.
Yeah, I mean, just as I understand it, and I don't know who's in the audience or listening, but as I understand it, it's been explained to me, the sort of problem with the tracking system today is that we're continuing to allocate CIP, capital budget, precious dollars to agencies for projects without knowing basically how much of prior allocations have actually been spent on the things for which they were intended. And it would seem reasonable to say, well, before we give you more money, can you tell us what you did the last time we gave you money? Is that right?
Yes.
Right. So it's a fairly simple and totally reasonable question. And it seems to me what I'm hearing is that enough people have asked it and expressed concerns that we are now on a path to having that information available the next time around to inform ourselves so that when we ask that question, we're doing it with information in front of us. And there will, of course, at times be perfectly reasonable explanations. We couldn't spend it because there are ways you can explain, and then there may be ways that are less compelling. So looking forward to that myself. Thank you. Okay, so I think there's a motion, and no, we haven't had a motion on this. Is there a motion to approve the capital transfers as previously stated from the, what date was that? From the March 5th, 2025 Board of Estimates meeting? A motion.
Motion to approve.
Is there a second? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. Motion carries. By the way, just since we're keeping track of CIP related things, the other process point that we've discussed is that on capital transfers, the charter actually requires them to come to the Planning Commission, I think first, Over time, it's evolved such that the Board of Estimates is hearing them first. I understand that there's been discussion about how to rectify that, and that is also underway. It's also something I'm keeping track of. So thank you. Okay. Shall we move to the regular agenda? Oh, I'm sorry. Oh, yes, pardon me. Thank you.
One more.
Thank you very much. On the consent agenda, Mr. Executive Secretary, do you want to read this for us, please?
Sure. The second item is a minor subdivision final plan for 2300 North Monroe Street, which is the new Shiloh complex in the 7th Councilmatic District. It's essentially to move a subdivision line by 175 feet.
Does anybody need to hear any more about this item? It's been presented. Okay. Is there a motion? Commissioner Horn, seconded by Commissioner Vice Chair Stevenson. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed, nay. Motion carries. Okay, now. we'll move
Okay.
to Regular agenda,
The
please.
first item on the regular agenda will be City Council Bill number 25-0020, zoning conditional use conversion of a single-family dwelling unit to 3 dwelling units in the R8 zoning district with variances at 2001 West Baltimore Street and the 9th Councilmatic District. Yes, so we'll present.
Good afternoon, everyone. Austin Davis, Land Use and Urban Design Planner here. And let's get started. So this is a request to convert a single-family dwelling into 3 dwelling units. It is located at the corner of Baltimore Street here, and here's some of the aerials of it. And as you can see, the property takes up pretty much the entire lot. And we can go over some of the conversion standards if you'd like. And I think, let me have this typed up here. But essentially, we have 5 standards that we're looking at here: either the practical difficulty or unnecessary hardship, uniqueness of the property, minimum necessary relief, no substantial harm to public welfare, and consistency with the zoning code's intent. And I believe for this application, in this project, with a lot area of only 40% variance required, while the lot is smaller than required, this condition is not self-created, it's inherent to the existing structure. Parking, a 100% parking variance was granted while the site, lacks off-street parking. There's public transit, around the area to mitigate this. And then the unit size, which we can go into more detail if required, but a variance is required but not yet applied for. The two of the units will not meet the 750 square foot minimum. So that will be, and I'll go over that as well. So as I mentioned, the district requires 1,875 square feet of lot area. And under the special calculation methodology, the subject property has 1,350 square feet, so we require a 40% variance. And this is because the calculation can be adjusted for conversions of 3 or more units, so you use a 2.5 instead of a 3. And this is where we get the 1,875 requirement instead of 2,250 square feet. Additionally, this sets the minimum for the lot, but not the units. So with 2 of the units being listed at being under 750 square feet, that will require an additional unit size variance and is not currently in the bill. And as mentioned, there is no off-street parking provided, and a 100% parking variance was granted. Our recommendation is amendment and approval with the following amendment to add the variances for 2 units for the square footage requirement of 600 square feet in lieu of the 700 square feet requirement.
Thank you, Mr. Davis. So this is really starts its life as a conditional use requirement, but because it also needs variances, the variances are happening at the same time. Is that what's kind of put it all in one place in the
Correct.
city council bill? Okay. Let me ask, first of all, are there folks in the audience or online who want to be heard on this item?
I believe the applicant, either the owner or the applicant, I believe they're related, are online.
And they have their hand up. Rain, I'm going to click the unmute, which will allow you to unmute from your side to be heard.
Well, before we do that, if you don't mind, I'm sorry. I just want to trying to keep track of who's there. Are there questions immediately for Mr. Davis, though, before we turn to the applicant?
I have some questions.
But, Commissioner Jolin, please.
Are we going in a circle or are we just putting it out there?
Oh, well, why don't you go first?
Okay, great. So a couple questions. The third unit first question is, thank you for your presentation. Do these units, we've seen these before, do these units currently exist or are they in planning? Does this control, and then we're trying to figure out what to do and get them ready for this, or are we planning to do 3?
So based off of the letter of intent, I do not believe they exist, as there was actually a range given for 2 of the units. However, I believe the applicant might be able to clear that up a little bit more. But given the letter of intent, I do not believe they exist.
What is the size of the third unit?
I believe it was 900 square feet.
900, so it's 9. Okay, thank you.
I'm happy to go around if the commissioners prefer. Deputy Mayor Williams,
No questions, thank you.
Commissioner Horn.
Just want to confirm, I see that there was a letter from Fayette Street Outreach, and they are not in opposition to this, right?
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah, I was going to note that, but thank you for calling it to everybody's attention. Anything else from you, Commissioner Jolin?
No, thank you, no more.
Councilman.
Thank you for the presentation. As Commissioner Horn mentioned, this has community support from Fayette Street Outreach, is why our office moved forward on it. So again, thank you for the opportunity.
DPW.
No questions, thanks.
Mr. Vice Chair.
No questions, thank you.
And is Commissioner Allen on the line? I don't.
Yes.
Does she have any questions of the staff?
Commissioner Allen, you can speak up if you have anything. Oh, I saw your mic moved, but I'm not hearing you. Okay, I'm not sure if you're double muted, but I'm seeing the microphone moving, but we're not hearing you in the room. Okay, not sure why we can't hear Commissioner Allen, but she's online and unmuted.
Does this need to be unmuted?
No, it's this one.
So, okay. Can she communicate by chat or something, just so I don't want to leave her out of the discussion.
Drop a note in the chat, Commissioner Allen, that would be helpful.
In the meantime, and we can certainly come back to Commissioner Allen as well as any other questions but the applicant you said is online and would like to speak?
Okay, yep. We'll go ahead with Rain if you want to go ahead and speak. It looks like you're unmuted.
I think we're having the same issues with Rain.
All right, can you hear me now?
We got you now. You're double muted. Sorry.
Great, thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for having me. This is very new to me. I've never done this before, but I did hear a couple of things that you mentioned. Yes, the Fayette Street Outreach Program, they were not in opposition, which was great. Been a long time coming, but nevertheless, my father and I, the house was passed down us by my grandfather. You know, my family been part of the community for years and years. And really our focus is just to have 3 separate units for 2 of my aunts and myself potentially, just so we can be closer. I can help them. As they mentioned, the parking, you know, for us, that wouldn't be an issue. We do have the public transportation. I know someone had asked were any of them already existing? I know how it was constructed. My grandfather, again, this was years ago, but he already had it set up for 2 units. But, you know, it's hard to describe, but it's a corner unit. It's larger than the other homes on the same block. And it could well be 3 units, which is, like I said, what we're trying to do. So, you know, definitely appreciate you guys' support. I don't know if you have any specific questions for me that I can answer for you.
Ma'am, this is John Laria. Can you just identify yourself for the record? I'm not sure.
Oh, yes. Yes, for the record. I am Rain Wilson. My father, Kenneth Wilson, he's also the owner of the house as well. He's elderly and he's having issues trying to sign on. And I work in DC, so otherwise I would be with him trying to help him. So he was having technical difficulties, but I'm here representing for the both of us.
And just tell us, the property is currently used in what form and for what purpose? Is it currently occupied, and if so, how many units?
No, it's not currently occupied. However, it was already framed for 2 units, which is why we wanted to extend it to 3 units, the upstairs, downstairs, and the basement, how we had planned it out.
Okay. Are there further questions for the applicant or for staff? I should note, and I'm sorry it's a bit out of order, I apologize, but I think the posting requirements have been met, so we know that that's been, I think we have it on the site. Yes, we do, so make sure that's covered. Okay. So there's nobody else in the audience or online? Yes, is Commissioner Allen available? Thanks. Commissioner?
I have no questions. I just find it very interesting, and I applaud the applicant.
Okay. Is there a motion to accept the staff report with an additional amendment to add variances for 2 units for the square footage requirement of 600 square feet in lieu of the 750 square feet? So it's the staff report, which is approval of the bill with that additional recommendation that we would attach to the commission's action. Is there a motion? Motion from Commissioner Allen. Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, opportunity for further discussion, if any? Okay, shall we move to a vote? Mr. Executive Secretary.
Robin Allen.
Approved.
John Bullock.
Approved.
Christine Griffin.
Approve.
Talib Horn.
Approve.
Claudia Jolin.
Approve.
Justin Williams.
Approve.
Eric Stevenson.
Approve.
John Laria.
Approve.
Next item on the agenda is City Council Bill number 25-0021.
Let me just say,
rezoning.
so the motion's carried. I just want to get it in the record. The motion carried unanimously, correct? No dissenting votes? All right, thank you. Sorry.
Next item on the agenda is City Council Bill number 25-0021, a rezoning for 3221 Frederick Avenue, the 9th Councilmatic District. Caitlin Aldet will present.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. Today I have to present to you the proposal to rezone 3221 Frederick Avenue from I-1 zoning to an IMU1 zoning district. My name is Caitlin Audette. The petitioner is Nate Prettle on behalf of Lisa Suidang. The owner is Balti Investment LLC. This is within the Southwestern Planning District, and Kyle Leggs is the community planner. The property at 3221 Frederick Avenue occupies the block width between Frederick Avenue to the north and Stafford Street to the south. The parcel includes a number of buildings, including a 5-story brick industrial building and a brick office building that fronts Frederick Avenue. The property is located near the intersection of Frederick Avenue and Caton Avenue in West Baltimore. It's directly east of the rail corridor, and there are no previous legislative or planning commission actions regarding the site. This area is unique in that a wide variety of building types and uses are found within a relatively small geography. These include industrial, residential, and commercial properties, as well as the railroad right-of-way and 2 cemeteries. The current zoning is I-1, shown here within this larger context, which includes a wide variety of zoning categories that reflect the diversity of the area. The 2024 Comprehensive Master Plan for the City of Baltimore, dated December 2nd of 2024. In this Comprehensive Master Plan, the subject property is designated in the industrial group within the General Land Use Plan. The proposed zoning change from I-1 to IMU1 does not conform with this designation. The property was historically the long-term location of both the Rennis Kleinley and Company Incorporated brush manufacturers and the Pittsburgh Plate Glass Company, PPG Industries, which, according to the 1928 Sanborn map, which you see here, shared the site at that time. In 1990, the property was sold from PPG Industries to the Maryland Brush Company, which was a newly created union-organized employee-owned company, which was remarkable. After a remarkable 30 years, the members voted to sell the business in 2020, which resulted in the location's closure at that time. The property was last sold to Balti Investment LLC in 2021 and has not been active since the closure of the Maryland Brush Company. So per zoning standards, staff finds that there has been substantial change in the character of the neighborhood due to the closure of the business. So the use of an I-1 zoning was appropriate during the last comprehensive rezoning in 2017 as the site continued to function in its long-term use of a steel brush manufacturing company. However, the sale and relocation of the company and its 5 years of vacancy is a substantial change. Additionally, the property more closely aligns with the intent and definition of the IMU1 zoning, which states that the IMU industrial mixed-use zoning districts are intended to encourage the reuse of older industrial buildings for light industrial use, as well as a variety of non-industrial uses. IMU1 is specifically for industrial buildings that are adjacent to existing residential buildings, typically row houses. The findings of fact include population change. The Gwinsfall neighborhood saw a small decline between the 2010 and 2020 census. The availability of public facilities, their areas well served, present and future transportation patterns. The proposed change may create some limited additional vehicular traffic depending on the ultimate use of the site. Compatibility with existing and proposed development. There's no other known proposed development in the immediate vicinity, so the proposed change is not in conflict. Recommendations of Planning Commission and BMZA. So BMZA has not yet commented on the bill, and staff recommends approval, and the relation of the proposed amendment to the city's plan. So no plans for the area identify the development of these sites outside of their current zoning. And then additional standards, so existing uses of the property within the general area. As previously stated, the immediate area includes residential, industrial, commercial, and open spaces, with immediately adjacent being residential row homes and commercial uses. Zoning classification of other properties in the area includes C2, R6, and I1, and the suitability of the property in question for the uses permitted under its existing zoning classification. The property was used for industrial purposes for over 150 years, so it did work well, but now with that change and the fact that the building is now historic when it wasn't when built, just changed things a bit. The trend of development, there's no real development trends on this part of the city, so it is not in conflict. And lastly, the Maryland Land Use Code, the proposed rezoning is not contemplated in any existing plans. The needs of the city, the rezoning would allow the continued use by light industrial while also providing the option for additional residential units and other uses. And this would meet needs of the city for both employers and housing, and the needs of the particular neighborhood. So the community would benefit from an active and appropriate use on the vacant site, and the change to IMU1 would allow the property to be reused in more varied ways, appropriate for its unique location along a commercial corridor, but also adjacent to residential properties. For the equity statement, the proposal would allow for a broader range of uses on the site that are more appropriate for unique historic buildings that are located there, that are also adjacent to the residential community. And the proposed change would allow the property to be adaptively reused after 5 years of vacancy. The community has met with the owner regarding the proposed zoning change and its reuse, and staff does not anticipate any undue impact to staff time or resources. The Gwynns Falls Community Association has been notified of the action and has provided their support for the rezoning. And lastly, staff recommends that the commission adopt the findings of fact and approve. Any questions?
So did you just say the Gwynns Falls Community Association has indicated its approval?
It's, yeah, their support.
Support, I didn't see.
Sorry, the Gwynns Falls Community Association has notified the action and provided their support of the rezoning. It was in an email. And there's somebody on.
Okay, I just don't see it in the report. Just says notified, and I don't see it on the Wix site. So I was just.
To be honest, it was an email that just said we support this.
Okay, that's fine. I just want to make sure the record.
I apologize for not uploading it on the Wix
site. No worries. Let me just, so I remember to do this in the up front. I want to note the item's been properly posted, and that there is no written testimony that's been submitted to us, just so we know where we're starting from. And what did you say the land use plan says? You had the slide up, I don't recall.
Sure, the land use plan identifies it as industrial, and not the mixed use predominantly industrial, which would be which is where the IMU categories live under. So that's why it is not congruous with the general land use plan.
Understood, okay. Are there, first of all, who do we have? You mentioned the person from the Gwynns Falls.
Chris Schultz, I believe, is on from Gwynns Falls, if you'd like to hear from him.
Just a moment. And then is there someone from the applicant?
The applicant and their representative is here.
Is here, okay. Well, let me start with first. Are there any questions by the commission of the staff? Deputy Mayor?
No, thank you.
We'll have a chance again after. Commissioner Horn?
I'm fine.
Okay. Commissioner Jolin? Councilman, I know it's your bill, but feel free if you'd like to add anything to the record.
No, just glad to have the commission hear this. I know the applicant is here. We had some fruitful discussions, and they can share with you what some of their intent for the building is. So thank you.
Thank you. Public Works?
No questions.
Mr. Vice Chair?
No questions.
Okay, I don't have any other questions at the moment. Let's hear from the applicant if they're here to add, and then we'll hear from anybody online, including the Community Association. Please introduce yourself for the record.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair. Nate Prettle. I'm here on behalf of the applicant, Lisa Dang. And first, I'd like to recognize Councilmember Bullock and thank you for your leadership on this. This is a really significant project for the area. Ms. Audette's staff did an excellent job going over the findings of fact and, sort of the data basis for justifying this rezoning. But for us, this is the first step in what will be, a lengthy process. Ms. Dang, I'll let her, if she has anything to add, but the anticipated use would be, a mixed-use development likely focused on elderly housing or some sort of assisted living, concept with supporting uses such as, cafe, as well as being able to market some of the space that's best suited for light industrial, for that types of use anticipated under the IMU1 zoning district. I fully agree with staff's interpretation that this is a change since the last comprehensive rezoning. This property, both in terms of its land area as well as the square footage, it's almost 200,000 square feet of gross floor area, make up such a significant, piece of this neighborhood that the closure of the brush factory in 2020, and its vacancy since is a major change. And the IMU1 zoning district, which was added as part of the 2017, overhaul of the city zoning code and zoning maps, is exactly what's needed for this property and to allow the reuse. The next steps for us would be assuming that, if we are able to obtain approval from the city council, I'd urge the commission to move the findings of fact and recommend approval, that we'd be able to engage architects, operators, designers, and, take this down the path to hopefully having, an operating, property, right on the heart of Frederick Avenue. I'll leave it at that, but happy to answer any questions if Ms. Bang, there's anything else you want to add.
The building has been vacant for a long, long time, and I talked to a lot of people.
I'm sorry. Could you just state your name and your?
My name is Lisa Dang.
Thank you.
Okay, that building has been vacant for a long time, and I talked to the neighborhood, and they say that it's needed for some changes in that neighborhood. And I believe with the constructions and the assisted living, they were going to create a lot of jobs and make the community a little bit better instead of being vacant and we sold to whatever people want to do with it. But I'm really passionate about the elderly. I think of a facility like that with elderly, which is not elderly, just basically housings that have elevators, handicap access. Housing would be great for communities. Instead of the elderly leaving the community or find someone else to go, we will have a facility to have all the bells and whistles for accessibility housing. So, you have any questions?
Thank you. Why don't we hear? Why don't we hear from the other fellow online from the association, and then if there are questions for everybody who's testified. Is it Chris Schultz? Is that?
Everyone, my name is Chris Scholze. I'm the president of the Gwynns Falls Community Association. Can you hear me over there?
Yep.
Yes. Okay, excellent. I had the opportunity to meet with Lisa Dang and her husband last week. We discussed their vision for the property. As mentioned in the presentation of our neighborhood in this project, we have a lot of different housing types in our neighborhood. We have multiple different styles of row homes. We have standalone homes. We have duplexes. One thing we do not have is accessible housing that does not require the use of stairs. So we've had a number of elderly folks, including some people on our community association board, move out of the neighborhood recently because they could no longer navigate stairs. So we think that this could be, definitely a benefit to the neighborhood, having this type of accessible housing. We're also in favor of the mixed use zoning because we think the first floor, the atrium of this facility, which is really a beautiful historic building, there are many different possibilities for the vision of that floor. I love the idea of a cafe. Another thing that's been holding our neighborhood back is a lack of access to restaurants and shops and a walking area. And who knows, this facility could address some of those needs as well. So we are in favor of this rezoning.
Thank you, sir. We'll see if there are any questions for you. So let's go around again and see if there are any questions for Mr. Preto, for the applicant, for the fellow from the community who testified. Again, I'll start with Deputy Mayor.
No questions, thanks.
Commissioner Horn.
No questions.
Commissioner Jolin.
No questions, thank you.
Councilman.
No questions, thank you.
Public Works.
No questions.
No questions.
Mr. Vice Chair, thank you very much. I just have one quick question, which is Ms. Audette, when the land use plan designated the building as industrial, do we know that I just don't know, what's the timing in terms of the business having been?
Yeah, so the business left in 2020, and to be honest, I think when the land use plan was being done, it was an industrial building. No, there was a lot of city that the planning department had to go over, and some things like this were missed. I think that that could then be listed almost as a mistake in the land use plan itself, because historic buildings like this, adjacent to row homes, should be in an IMU category.
And you said a couple times historic building. What does that have any?
It is not designated, though I am eager to speak with the owner about even just being on a inventory of some kind, because given the unique history of really the union-owned business that was here for 30 years.
And are you referring, I have it on this screen here, but are you referring to the building that fronts on Frederick or the larger industrial?
They were all, the whole thing,
Whole
yeah.
thing. I assume the building in the front was offices for the company?
It was.
When it was enacted, okay, all right. Okay, are there any other questions? Okay, is there a motion then to accept the staff recommendation to adopt the findings in the staff report and approve the request for rezoning? Take a motion.
Motion to adopt and approve, or I'll second, Commissioner Allen.
Okay, Commissioner Allen has moved, the Vice Chair has seconded. Is there any further discussion? Further discussion. Hearing none, we'll move to a vote. Mr. Executive Secretary.
Robin Allen.
Approved.
John Bullock. Approved. Christine Griffin.
Approve.
Talib Horn.
Approve.
Claudia Jolin.
Approve.
Justin Williams.
Approve.
Eric Stevenson.
Approve.
And John Laria.
Approve. The vote is, how many of us are here? 8 of us, pardon me. So the vote is 8-0, unanimous in favor. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for.
Thank you.
Thank you. The next item on the agenda is City Council Bill number 25-0023, a rezoning for 3200 Lily Avenue in the 10th Councilmatic District. Justin Walker will present.
Good afternoon, everyone. Again, my name is Justin Walker, and I'll be talking about Council Bill 2025-0023 this afternoon. So the request from this bill is for a rezoning of the property located at 3200 Lily Avenue. The petitioner is here with us, Chase Hoffberger, the owner, John Laurie, and this is in the South Planning District with the community planner, Jasmine Kimmel. So just looking at the parcel here on City View, you can see it is a triangular property right at the intersection of West Patapsco Avenue and Lily Avenue. Viewing the overhead, we can see the building that has occupied the property for quite some time, going back to the 1980s. It is a public storage building, which again has been in the neighborhood and operated for multiple decades. And as you notice with the north view here, there are a good deal of industrial uses surrounding the property, which will be important as we get into the rezone in just a minute. Again, taking a look from the south, you can see there is the small enclave of residential surrounded by all of these industrial uses. So taking a look at the zoning map, the current zoning is R4, and this is a recent change. In 2017, with the comprehensive rezone, the property was rezoned from the prior industrial designation to residential, and it's not entirely clear why that change was made. So we are considering this rezone to be under the standards of a mistake, because as you can see, all of the other industrial properties surrounding that small residential enclave right before the county line maintain the light industrial use. However, only that property was rezoned at the time. So this does just show that prior zoning code under the light manufacturing, all of those industrial properties were included, and in 2017, only that one parcel was changed over. The community planner that was there at the time, unfortunately, isn't with us any longer, not with the department any longer.
He's alive, he's retired.
He's alive, yes. He's not with planning any longer. So we can't get the exact justification for why that was changed, but we do believe it to be a mistake because, again, this use has existed for a long time and is surrounded by industrial uses that have operated in harmony with the community for some time. As we move over to the general land use map, you can see that it is designated as lower density, which of course would conflict with this rezoning. Now, it was rezoned in 2017, and of course the land use map was adopted after that. So we believe that the same flawed logic was followed when that designation was made on the land use map. Getting into the Maryland Land Use Code requirements. So as I just mentioned, it doesn't follow the general land use plan because the land use plan was adopted after the flawed rezoning. As far as the needs of both the city of Baltimore and the neighborhood, we have a long industrial history, and as you saw on the map, so does that section of Cherry Hill. So allowing this property to maintain its industrial use will allow for that economic development that comes along with it, and it would also be very difficult to see residential development occur on that lot. And I will just note that the current owner does not have any new development or any changes planned. They only want to see their use maintained as conforming so that they can be granted their use and occupancy permits. So going into the approval standards, obviously this is not a comprehensive rezone, it's just a single parcel. And as I mentioned earlier, there's two findings. Either it has to be substantial change or a mistake. We believe that a mistake was made in 2017 when the property was rezoned away from its existing industrial category. And just moving into some quick findings of facts, there was a slight increase of the population by less than 200 in that tract. As you saw with all of those industrial uses surrounding it, public facilities will not be a problem. The area is able to support the other industrial uses and this use that has persisted for decades. There should not be any change in the transportation patterns. As I mentioned, there's no planned development or change of the site, just a retention of what has existed. And of course, as you saw, all the industrial zones, it is compatible with the current uses of the area. So with that, just to recap, maintaining this industrial zone will allow the existing use to continue. There's no clear changes to the structure. We believe the mistake standard is met, as there's no clear reason or understanding why in 2017 this industrial property was changed to residential, and having this rezoning will allow the property owner to maintain that conforming use that is operated for decades. As far as notifications, the Lakeland Community Association, SB7, and Cherry Hill Coalition were notified of this action and voiced support. As was the case with the last bill, the support came by way of email, so they are not on Wix. I apologize for that. And I believe they were also sent letters directly to the council member. So the recommendation from staff is to adopt the findings and approve the rezone. Are there any questions for staff?
Let me start with this one. First, just so we know, is there anybody, and no one here or online as the... Oh, the applicant is here. Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah,
yes,
I'm
yes,
sorry.
applicant's
Apologies.
representation is here.
What about the residential residents adjoining the property? I mean, have they? They're now. There are. You can go back to that map, would you, for us? Yeah, that's a good one. So, do we know anything from the residents in the R3 who are now? I mean, I realize that the use. Go back another step. The current use is what on that parcel?
Is a warehouse, which is a public storage.
Right, okay. So it's not, and this rezoning is not at the moment to change that use, is that correct?
No, there's no proposals to change the use.
But it could change?
Yes, obviously, with the rezone,
Right.
anything that's allowed in I-1 could come about in the future.
So do we have any input from anybody, or have we spoken to anybody? We can ask the applicant this question among the R3 houses there whose neighboring property will change from R4 to?
I do believe the applicant has had some contact with them. If you would like to,
we can save that.
when-
Sorry, we can save that. And I don't think this is preclusive, but I would just point out. I mean, in the findings, you say the relation of the proposed amendment to the city's plan, the change will correct the mistake in the zoning. But the correct answer to the relation of the proposed amendment to the city's plan is that it is contrary to the city's plan. And the land use plan may have been mistaken, but the fact today is it's not. I mean, the land use plan, you said, didn't you say shows that as?
Yes, it does show that as lower density residential.
I can add some coloration to that. So when we look at possibilities of a mistake, we go back to the 2012 origins, and I usually go from the beginning, and then if I can find it. So this parcel was designated when the bill was introduced in 2012 to go to residential for whatever reason, and literally nobody caught it. Fast forwarding to last year, when we were looking at developing the general land use plan, we started with a couple staff exercises actually in this room where we had city view up showing what the existing zoning was, and staff were literally coloring on maps to see where they wanted to keep what would track to the existing zoning or where they might want to change things. So of course, there was a shift in district planner between 2012 to 2017 and last year. So the strong tendency was to create the general land use map based on the existing zoning unless there was a known reason to differ from it. And so we think that the original zoning mistake informed and carried through to the general land use plan. So even though it would, at a cursory glance, be non-conforming to the land use plan, we think that that itself was a mistake.
So we're correcting two mistakes.
Well, hopefully next year when we take another shot at the general land use plan, this will be on the list.
Okay. Okay, are there any questions for the staff, or should we wait? Should we hear from the applicant and then do questions?
I have a couple questions for
Please,
staff.
go right ahead.
Mr. Walker, thank you. Could you go back, I think, one slide to the aerial view? So when you look at the zoning map, it looks like that property is part of a block of industrial properties. But when I look at this map, I see a residential neighborhood that has a tree buffer between the industrial properties and has a street buffer with a median between the other industrial properties. And then, and I noticed that there are no industrial zoned properties on Lilly Avenue. So to me, without the benefit of knowing what folks were thinking at that time, I can see a couple of compelling reasons why that change may have been made. Do you think that any of those could explain why the property was rezoned?
I've done this review. I mean, it is certainly close by to the residential uses, but on the other street, Magnolia Avenue there's also an industrial property that is abutting the residential uses. So if that was the logic to eliminate any industrial uses that abut the residential zone, then it wouldn't have been applied to the whole area, but only to that parcel.
Could you go back? I didn't see that on Magnolia.
Sorry. So you can see the end of the truck lot right there, which is behind the rear yard of the residences.
Sure. My other question was in reference, so you stated that this is an existing use.
Yes.
But you also stated that the zoning change was needed for them to get a use and occupancy.
Yes.
So could you clarify if this has been an ongoing use, or are they like reopening a previous use?
So as far as I'm aware, it is ongoing use. I think that the concern would be if they need to obtain another use and occupancy permit, if there is a vacancy or change of ownership or whatever would necessitate it.
Sure.
Then they would need to be conforming.
A non-conforming status doesn't prevent anyone from doing business. It would unless they close, then it would prevent them from reopening, right?
Yes, they can continue operating the non-conforming use. I think the concern arises is if there is a need to obtain another permit for the property, they wouldn't be able to do so.
I'm going to go out on a limb, and Chase, you can let us know if we're wrong. Was this a change of owner? Yeah. Yep. Okay. So whenever you have a change of ownership, you have to file a new use and occupancy permit just to make that mechanically happen, and that's when they discovered the zoning mismatch.
But just like, just like with liquor stores, there were many examples in the transform where things were intentionally made non-conforming because communities didn't want continuations of those uses. Liquor stores is one example, but industrial could have been another.
Yes. Again, unfortunately, Brent's not here. He's retired, so we can't ask him if there was a deliberate intent to downzone.
I was just reading about him.
Yeah. So I'm going to go out on a limb and say, there was not really a compelling reason that we could find to deliberately downzone this, and it was just missed this whole time.
Can I just jump in for a factual? When was the current facility there built? And if you don't know, we can ask the applicant.
1987, late 80s.
So it's been a self-storage facility since the 1980s, maybe
that
changed
entire
hands
time.
a few times?
Yes.
Okay.
Sorry.
That's all. You poked at the concern for the residential neighborhood across the street, and I'm just not sure we're using all of our creativity when we say that I can't imagine why that property would have been rezoned. That's all. Thank you.
Other questions for staff before we hear from the applicant? We may have questions for the applicant as well. Questions for staff? No? Okay. Let's ask the applicant. I'm sorry, Councilman, please.
Not a question for the staff. Just want to thank staff for the report. Justin, former student of mine, so I'm very proud to see him in action. So good stuff.
Okay, well, let's bring the applicant up and see what he has to say and if there are further questions.
What was his grade in your class?
He actually did really well, as a matter of fact. A and B students there.
Thanks for having me. Chase Hoffberger here. Mr. Chair, I'll answer your question first. And I'll try to not confuse the names between Laria and John Laria and John Lowry. Mr. Lowry does have a good relationship with these neighbors on Lilly Avenue, and he lets them park in the parking lot when they have parties and things like that. We knocked on every door and we spoke with everybody on the street, and those that weren't home at the time, we left a note that had sort of a full rundown of the zoning proposal and my phone number, so on and so forth. And so we didn't hear anything, so we assumed that there's no issue there. As Justin said, there's no plans to redevelop this property. This is, Mr. Lowry owns a number of properties in the city, and he's called this one his best investment. And he wants to pass it on as a storage facility to his kids when he retires. To speculate on the rezoning that occurred during Transform, while this property fronts on both Patapsco and Lilly, its address is Lilly, and Lilly Avenue is a really short street that basically where the picture ends there, that's the county line. And my speculation is that the rezoning just kind of swallowed up everything that was on Lilly Avenue, that had a Lilly Avenue address. And they said, all right, well, we'll make this a residential street. But as you can see, it's really surrounded by industrial properties, and it had an industrial use prior to the rezoning that occurred in 2017. So we think it's more appropriate to be an industrially zoned property. And I'm happy to answer any other questions.
Thank you. I'm sorry, my question is actually for Mr. Tiso. I'm just curious, what zones allow this sort of warehouse or storage? It's not, because I don't think that it's a relatively light use. I think to the owner's point, I don't think that it would only be industrial that would allow this.
I don't think the commercial zones allow storage.
Yeah, it might be C4. Unfortunately, I tried looking on my tablet on the new online zoning code, and it's not super mobile compatible apparently, so I can't see half the text. So I can't answer that where I sit here without getting a different computer. But I suspect it's predominantly all the industrial districts, maybe C4 is our heavy commercial zone, but I would need to grab a computer that's not in use for the hearing to tell you for sure.
It's fine. I'm just curious. Thank you.
Do you have the ability to do street view on whatever you got there?
Yeah, I can. Sure.
Thanks. Perfect. So I did this, just because I'm looking at it on the laptop, and I don't think that's not sufficiently sort of for everybody's benefit. The reason I wanted to do that is I wanted to see what it looks like. You can't tell from the aerial view, frankly, what the thing is. It actually looks like a bunch of residential garages. It doesn't look like, you said self-storage, and so I'm saying that in a positive way to say that it is not, it's a fairly low-scale thing that looks like a bunch of residential garages that happen to be a self-storage. It also looks like this is maybe gratuitous, but it looks well cared for. In terms of.
It's very clean, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, so it's 34 garage bays, and they're like 10 by 20. And actually, if Mr. Tiso scans across Patapsco, that's a full-scale storage facility, an actual public storage.
Right.
So.
And could you just, since we're driving down the street, could you swing around and show us the houses across the street, please? Yeah, keep going. And then keep going down the block a bit, just to get a sense. Great.
Right, so they've all got a line of communication to Mr. Lowry and have had a good relationship with him. And then the county line's right at the end there.
Yeah. I mean, I guess I would just say that I'm less concerned about the status quo in the sense that they've been there a long time. We would hear, I think, if there was a problem. It looks well cared for. I could see how everybody thinks this is fine because it just looks like, it's just got that sort of that, and the scale is, and I think it doesn't seem right to saddle it forever with with a residential zone and create this nonconformance, which is what it is. My only concern, and at the end of the day, I think it probably yields to in my mind, to approving it, is what's going to happen when this goes away. What could happen when this goes away? And that concerns me a little bit more, but we haven't really heard any objections to it. So I guess I'm not inclined to go deeply down that road, but that would be my concern if I were just being sort of independent and just looking at it. It's not really what's there. It's what's going to happen if we create an I-1 parcel there that then potentially could do something that is, all of a sudden, people are going to say, why did we let that happen in 2025?
Well, certainly, and there's always the potential that a covenant is agreed to or something like that as part of rezoning, and that didn't come up in any of our conversations with Lakeland or Cherry Hill or SB7. Yeah. And,
okay.
So and again, Mr. Lowry has no intention to sell. He intends to pass it down. So we expect it to stay in its current form.
All right. Okay. Those are my questions.
Great.
Are there further questions for the applicant or staff or anybody else? Did I say that posting had been achieved? I really got to, just in case I did not, the item was properly posted. We have evidence of that in the file. So I think the motion that I would request, if someone wants to make it, is to approve adopt the findings of the Planning Commission staff report and approve the proposed rezoning. Yeah, that'll be it. Is there a motion?
Did we hear an equity analysis on this? Is that in the staff report?
That was in the staff report, but not in the slides. I can run through it if you would like.
I'll just get to the point. I mean, I don't know what the demographics on this block are, but Cherry Hill is a historically predominantly Black community. Industrial uses encroaching on Black neighborhoods is a historical equity issue, and period. And, I'm a little bit uncomfortable with this because I have recollection from, being on the community side during rezoning. And again, I mentioned the liquor stores. This was presented to a lot of communities as a strategy to, exactly as you said, Chair, to keep the status quo. I agree that's, there's nothing objectionable about the current use. And, I think that the rezoning would have sought to keep it that way. And, I do think that we need to be concerned with everything that would be allowed under an industrial use. And, you only have to look across the street, as we panned before, to see, how intense that could be across the street from, houses that have, bikes strewn in their front yard. So,
just to clarify, as a matter of fact, and not to distinguish, Lily Avenue, the homes, largely Latino. So again, not to distinguish, just to clarify.
Okay. So is there a motion to accept the findings and to support the staff recommendation?
So moved.
It's been moved by Commissioner Jolin. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Commissioner Horn. Is there any further discussion?
I would just note that as you pointed out, it's contrary to the land use plan. And so I just, that's all.
Okay, if there's nothing else, we'll move to a vote. Mr. Executive Secretary, please.
Certainly, Robin Allen.
Approve.
And Councilman Bullock commented approving the list.
Christine Griffin.
Approve.
Talib Horn.
Approve.
Claudia Jolin.
Approve.
Justin Williams. Eric Stevenson.
Opposed?
John Laria.
Approve. Motion carries 7 votes to 1. Did I get that? Okay, thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, so on our reordered agenda, we are now turning to the CIP recommendations and vote. Is that correct, Mr. Executive
Correct.
Secretary? Would you call that before us, please?
The final item on today's agenda will be the fiscal year 2026 to 2031 capital improvement program recommendations and vote. Sarah Parnellum will present.
My desktop, why did that change?
While we're waiting for the slides, good afternoon, Sarah Parnellum, Division Chief for Policy and Data Analysis, back to talk to you again about the capital improvement program. We had a detailed work session 2 weeks ago, and today we're here for the vote. I posted follow-up items from the work session on the WIC site, and I would be happy to go through those. I was going to go through the presentation first, and then walk through the follow-up materials, but we can reverse that if there's a delay with the presentation.
Yeah, go ahead. I'm trying to figure out how to get this explain.
Okay. So you should see a series of follow-up documents on the WIC site. The first one is general follow-up, and this really lays out responses to the questions and inquiries we heard last time. The first section details recommended changes from the work session. So we have 2 changes that are incorporated into the recommendations that you're seeing in the reports. The first change is moving $2 million in general funds from Robert C. Marshall Field to homeless service facilities. An original request for Robert C. Marshall Field of $2.4 million is what is needed for that project based on the current estimate. So there was a miscommunication. There was an understanding that the gap was $2 million, not realizing that that was already baked into the requests. And so that additional $2 million is not needed for the project. It's expected to be fully funded with the $2.4 million that's in there. The additional funds for homeless services facilities support a federal earmark request that the city submitted. So that's the first change. And then the second change is very, very much an administrative item. Several years ago in the CIP, $400,000 was appropriated in DGS's budget for the McKim Free School. That property, as it turns out, is actually in Recreation and Parks inventory. And so we're correcting that mistake and moving that funding into Rec and Parks inventory. All right, we can go back to the slides and get through all of those at the end. Maybe? It just buzzed me. I don't know what that means. Oh. I am. I think I am. Okay. So this is going to be a little bit repetitive from last time, but just in case we have anyone who is joining us now for the capital improvement program, I want to go through all of the materials. So bear with me, and please feel free, to ask any additional questions that you have. By city charter, the Planning Commission annually submits a recommendation for the 6-year capital improvement program to the Board of Estimates. And of that 6-year program, the first year becomes a budget year and is incorporated into the Ordinance of Estimates and adopted by the City Council as the city's capital budget for the year. The Board of Estimates has established a policy about what is a capital improvement, what is eligible to be in the capital improvement program and what is not appropriate. So a capital improvement is a physical betterment or improvement, and any preliminary studies there too. And then there's a list of items that are not appropriate for the capital budget, and you can see that list. We have a series of agencies that participate every year in the capital budget. These are our larger infrastructure agencies as well as our community development agencies. And the Department of General Services serves as a property manager for other agencies that don't participate directly in the capital budget process. So just quickly in terms of the process, we are... Oh, and I apologize, I have the wrong item highlighted there. We are now at March, Planning Commission vote. But this is the process that we go through every year to prepare the recommendations and then go through the approval process for the CIP. So we start in the fall with providing guidance to city agencies. They submit requests and we review those requests. There were presentations to the Planning Commission in January. We had a detailed work session 2 weeks ago at the end of February. Today, the Planning Commission will be making recommendations that will be passed along to the Board of Finance and the Board of Estimates. And they will be reviewing the 6-year program. And then the first year, as I mentioned before, goes to the City Council for approval. We did do a few things new this year. So we started the planning process for FY26 through 31 using the prior year capital improvement program. And that allows us to report on changes and provide explanations for those changes. So we have a report now where you can see, is this change from what was programmed to what was requested because of a change in cost estimate or a change in priority or some other reason. We also have a report that compares what was requested versus what was recommended. We asked agencies to budget by phase so that we have transparency into whether agencies are requesting funds for design or for construction. And that allows us to make sure that we're funding all of one phase in a single fiscal year rather than spreading out funding for construction over multiple years as we've done in the past. And then we're really trying to focus and increasingly on state of good repair. So we're reserving some funds for special projects, but trying to focus, because we know that is such an important need in the city, to focus a lot of the capital dollars on state of good repair. We also are distinguishing between projects and programs and collecting different information for projects versus programs. So for projects, we're collecting information in terms of cost estimates for the different phases. We're requesting location information. For programs, we're really interested in what is the optimal funding level. This is something that we're going to see every year in the capital improvement program. We're funding it at a certain level now, but if we had additional funds, how much is needed to achieve a state of good repair and to continue a state of good repair? We have asked agencies to provide grant work tags for any requests for state or federal funds for the budget year. So we're trying to be much more disciplined about appropriating state or federal funds only when we know that those funds will be received by the city, either because they're formula funds that we receive every year or because we have a grant that we've been awarded. And then we continue the policy from fiscal year 25, allowing agencies to document needs that are above their targets for consideration by this body as well as others. So I want to now turn to looking at the source of funds for the capital budget, and so we'll look at a breakdown by revenue category. So this provides you a summary of all of the funding by revenue category, and you can see that it's broken into 5 broad categories. So we have funds that are local funds that we have the most discretion over. Those are our general funds, as well as 4 different general obligation bonds. So we have included in that public infrastructure, community and economic development, affordable housing, and schools. These are approved by voters and included in the capital budget. The next category is our highway user revenue. These are funds that we receive from the state and are focused on our right-of-way transportation projects. The next category is federal and state revenues, and these really vary from year to year. So some of them are more consistent because they're formula-driven, although those formulas do change. And then some of them are based on, bless you, are based on specific awards, competitive grant applications, and that type of thing. The next category is the largest category in the capital budget, which is the utility revenue. So these are funds that are specific to the water, wastewater, and stormwater utilities and have to be used for those purposes. And then we have a few other fund sources at the bottom. So here you can see kind of that same chart visually. So you can see, the fund sources in purple were those local discretionary funds. You can see the highway user revenue in yellow, the federal and state in blue, and then the largest share in green is the utility revenues. And then if you wanted to look at that over the 6-year program, you can see that the totals vary from year to year, but that you'll see that the utility revenues in the green are always going to be the largest share. And when they're larger, the total budget is larger. Here you can see the history of general obligation bonds, the authorization. So general obligation bonds have to be approved by voters every 2 years. So you can see that these are kind of in 2-year pairs as we are working to increase the authorizations starting this year, and then 2 years later increasing again, and then 2 years later increasing again. This is really a critical fund source for the capital budget. This is our largest discretionary fund source, and so we're very excited to see these increases. These are the proposed allocations of the general obligation bonds. So you can see that we're really trying to increase the investment in public infrastructure. We know that has been deferred for so many years, and so as the general obligation bonds increase, we're focusing that increase for public infrastructure. This is the history for highway user revenue, and you can see the capital in the lighter color there relative to the amount of highway user revenue that's in the operating budget, which is in the darker gray at the bottom. We are in the first year of that highest spike there where it says 94 million. So we will have significant funding next year for highway user revenue. But then in FY28, you can see that the capital funds for highway user revenue drop dramatically if there isn't a change in the legislation in Annapolis. And then the last revenue category that I wanted to take kind of a deeper look at is the PAYGO general funds. So the base level is typically $15 million a year. We have significantly more than that in FY26 and able to invest in some additional priorities because of that. So that's really a boon to the capital budget. And then in the future years, you'll see that the amounts that are above 15 million are really placeholders for the match for the West Baltimore United project. So now we've looked at the sources of funds. We want to look at how are the funds proposed to be used. So this is a breakdown by agency for the 6-year program. And the breakdown by agency really mirrors the breakdown by fund source because different agencies have access to different funds. So where we saw the utility revenues were the largest share in terms of the revenue categories, we can see DPW is the largest share in terms of the agencies. Those funds are dedicated to the utilities within DPW. Transportation is the next largest share of the capital budget, and that's really because transportation is using both local funds, the highway user revenue funds, as well as federal funds. They have many projects that have an 80% participation from federal funds. And then HCD is the next largest. Again, they have access to federal funding as well. So the agencies that are reliant pretty much entirely or almost entirely on local funding are the smallest share of the capital budget. And so here you can see, again, kind of over the 6 years, the same patterns, right? So in green we have DPW, and as DPW is larger or smaller, you can see that the total budget is larger or smaller. You can also see the yellow is the highway user revenue, and you can really see how that shrinks starting in FY28. I'm sorry, the yellow is transportation, but you can see the impact of the shrinkage of the highway user revenue on transportation's total budget. Here you can see the percent of each agency's budget that is either local discretionary funds, so general funds or general obligation bonds, or highway user revenue. So again, you can see some agencies are completely reliant on those local sources, and then other agencies, you'll see Public Works is very little in terms of those local sources and is largely funded by the utilities. So now I want to shift into some highlights for FY26. So as I mentioned 2 weeks ago, we're able to fund Phase 1 and Phase 2 for the future East Side Transfer Station. Phase 1 is improvements to the existing administrative offices, and Phase 2 is the compost facility. We are also able to fund $10 million in local funding and $20 million in state funding for impact investment areas. And if you compare this to 2 years ago in FY24, this is a dramatic increase when it was only $2 million in local funding.
Can I just ask you a very quick question? These are FY26, obviously, but we're comparing them to 24. Is there a reason we're not comparing them to 25?
The differences are not as dramatic in FY25.
Well, we could just compare them to 1903 then, I guess. It'd be really dramatic.
Yeah, so in FY25, we started to see the increase in highway user revenue, whereas FY24 brings us, if we go all the way back here. So if you look at FY24, it was $25 million in highway user revenue for capital, and what it's going to be in FY28, when that's going to have less purchasing power, is going to again be $25 million. So that's the comparison, is sort of what it will look like when we only have $25 million. It's not relevant for the impact investment areas, but it is relevant for the next couple of items that have a comparison to FY24. In FY25, the amount was $69 million. So it's a very different comparison. Does that make sense, or are you?
I appreciate your candor.
Sure. So the next comparison to FY24 is for sidewalks. So we have $12 million in sidewalk repairs in FY26 and only $1.5 million in FY24. And the $12 million for sidewalk repairs in FY26 is in addition to $12 million for the partial ADA consent decree. So we're making really unprecedented investments in the pedestrian infrastructure. We also have in the FY26 recommendations $40 million in resurfacing compared to about $14 million in FY24. And then we have funding for either acquisition or renovation or a combination of the two for facilities for the homeless. And we have, for the first time, a line item specifically for public art. Turning to recreation and parks, there is substantial funding in
I'm sorry, can I ask you one more?
Yeah.
Do you know, the public art item on the last one, do you know what the number is?
$1 million.
Thank you. I think we talked about that. But
Yep.
Thanks.
Included in the FY26 recommendations are funds to complete many projects in recreation and parks that are currently partially funded, but not funded enough to be able to award construction contracts. And so we have recommended a lot of funding above what was programmed last year in order to be able to get these projects to the finish line. We also have included, and I think it might be the only new project that we have included in Recreation and Parks for FY26, design funding for Lillian Jones Recreation Center. And then there is funding included in FY26 for acquisition for the Highlandtown Greektown segment of the Greenway Trail. And then if we look into the 6-year program, if we look at highlights for FY27 through 31, we have, in keeping with the policy that I mentioned earlier about trying to fully fund construction in a single year, we have moved things around to be able to provide the rest of the funding for the Northeast Police District in FY27. We are providing over time the local match for West Baltimore United in keeping with what was submitted in the application for that project. We have funding for broadband network upgrades in FY28 through 31. We have in the recommendations funding for HVAC replacement at the Clarence Mitchell Courthouse. This is something that's programmed for FY29. So as we look at the downtown, this may shift, but we know that this is a critical need. There is funding recommended for surplus schools demolition, some funding in FY26, and then additional funding in FY29 through 31. There is funding programmed for Abel Woolman multi-systemic improvements. This is a project that received prior funding, but it's not sufficient to complete the project. And so we're coming back and trying to provide the full need in FY30. And then phase 3 of the East Side Transfer Station, which is the transfer station itself, is programmed for FY31. And then I've included one highlight from school's CIP, which is a renovation of Edmondson High School. We also have several parks projects that are in the future years. So we have the next phase of North Hartford Park improvements. We have programmed construction funding for Lillian Jones Recreation Center, $15 million in FY28. We have funding for the first phase of the improvements at the reservoir. This is not the DPW tank improvements. This is the amenities in the park for users of the park. And then we have Madison Square, Nathan Irby Park, and the Madison Square Dome renovation in FY29 and FY30 respectively, as well as several pool projects. So the next section here is the distribution analysis. About 4 or 5 years ago, we started doing what we were at the time calling an equity analysis. I think we realized that distribution analysis is maybe the more appropriate name. This wasn't included when we did the work session 2 weeks ago, but we now have this data available to share with you. So these are the community statistical areas with the highest level of investment for FY26 when you exclude the DPW projects. The DPW projects, as we've seen, are at a very different scale than the rest of our agency projects, and so it really kind of skews the analysis. So we look at them separately. You will see when we look at a map that these are all clustered in West Baltimore, and so this is really being driven, I think, by West Baltimore United. By the appropriations for that project. So these are the maps. The one on the left is looking at all the projects without DPW, and the one on the right is looking at DPW projects. And the community statistical areas with the highest level investment are all along that western Route 40 corridor. And so West Baltimore United, $85 million in appropriations. Federal appropriations for that project is driving that. We also look at the allocations based on race and income. So we look at.
I'm sorry, one question for you. Is how much of the CIP dollars are driven by the Reconnecting Communities grant? Either the grant itself or the sort of supplemental or complementary expenditures?
As a percentage? I could do some quick math.
No, I don't, I mean.
It's $85 million for the federal grant, and then in FY26, there's $700,000 in local match. So if you compare that to other projects, it's at a scale that's much greater if you're looking at non-DPW projects. So in the total, it's not necessarily a huge percentage, but if you're looking kind of at the scale of projects that are located in neighborhoods, it's dominant.
Okay, thanks.
So this analysis is looking at the community statistical areas and the characteristics of the community statistical areas by both race and income. And so if we had an even distribution, which is not necessarily our goal, but if we had an even distribution, you would see these in the investment in quarters. But we have investment that is more than 25% in the neighborhoods that have the highest percentage Black and African American residents in FY26. This is an increase from FY25. Again, that corridor where West Baltimore United is going to have community statistical areas that are largely African American. And then if you look by income, you will see that there is the largest share of investment is in the neighborhoods with the lowest household income, below $35,000. And then these are kind of the same type of analysis, but looking at the DPW projects. And then as we're closing out, I just wanted to note some of the reports that you have available to you on your WIC site. Hopefully you've had a chance to look at these. We will be posting them online as well. And staff recommends approval, but I do want to go back to the follow-up items and go through those in case there were any questions. All right, so I talked about 2 changes that were made since the work session that are reflected in the recommendations that you have. We also have a proposed amendment that is not recommended yet in the changes that you have, but that is for your consideration. And this is adding $500,000 in general funds to the homeowner incentive program. And the intention would be to use these funds to attract former and current federal employees to buy homes in Baltimore. We have a series of different programs that are within that homeowner incentives program, and so this is, a potential new program. The next section here is a recap of future briefing sessions that we noted based on the work session. I think the chair already mentioned these earlier. So Affordable Housing Trust Fund, Vacants Initiative, P3s, Greenway Trail, Highway User Revenue, and then I added 2 from the earlier conversation, which is an update from Recreation and Parks and an update from Housing on the Housing Plan. I think Recreation and Parks is interested in presenting on the BCRP playbook. And so that might be kind of good timing for that briefing, and then we can ask for updates on CIP projects as well if you're interested in that. The next section here is we provided some responses to questions that the Planning Commission had, either responses that the Planning Department was able to provide or that we reached out to agencies to get additional information. So there was a request for a list of projects that are recommended in the FY26 through 31, CIP that were not requested by the agency. And so we provided a list, about 10 projects or so. There was also a request for recent history of federal funding in the capital budget, as well as a breakdown of what funds in the capital budget are formula-based and which ones are not formula-based, where there's a competitive grant application to receive those. And so you have a list of the projects in FY26, FY25, and FY24 that received federal funding, and you can see the different types of federal funding where we have that information available. So the CDBG funding that housing receives, that is formula-based. FHWA is Federal Highway Administration. That is also formula-based, as is home. But the other federal, those are competitive applications where an agency, whether it's transportation or DPW, has sought out those funds through an application process typically.
Before you move off the federal funds, when I look at those 3 years, and what I'm seeing in FY24 is $53 million in federal funds. In FY25, $92.4 million, and 26, $153 million. Am I looking at the right numbers there when I say that?
I think so.
So what? I mean, I didn't go compare them, and I didn't look at the individual. Like, what explains that? 53 to 90 something to 150 something. Is it? I guess reconnecting communities is 85 million in the 26. That's a pretty big chunk, right?
That's correct.
So, if we took that out, it would actually be less, I guess, than 25. Does that sound right?
Yes.
And is it less than 25 and 26 than 20 if you took that out? Is there a reason it declines in 26? I mean, before,
The federal funds, like the overall capital budget, are lumpy. So unlike the operating budget that rises gently with inflation, if you will, the capital budget is very lumpy. So those formula funds are likely to be more consistent from year to year, but the formulas change. An agency might already have appropriations that they're using that they don't need to request additional ones. There's various reasons why, they're not just going to be consistent from year to year. And then those competitive ones just throw a complete a complete wrench in anything you would try and look at in terms of trends.
Okay.
The next item in your packet of resources is a memo from the Mayor's Office of Infrastructure Development related to the Greenway Trail. And they are definitely prepared to come and do a briefing for the Planning Commission and expand on this memo, but provided this as an initial response. I also have, which is not listed on the follow-up sheet, but I have kind of a last-minute addition, a list of bike facilities and active transportation planning, just kind of to expand on our conversation about Greenway trails. The chair asked me to take a look at bike facilities in general. Had a conversation with Stu Sirota at Transportation, and he identified some of these, and I identified other ones. These are projects that are in the CIP related to either bike facilities, or the first item is for transportation planning for active transportation. So they don't have a line item called, bike design or something like that, but that is, he explained that is part of what would be included in this item.
Do you happen to know which item that is? I'm looking at
The very
this, yeah.
first one, comprehensive transportation planning studies. Do you have this? Oh,
I was
the
looking at the big blue
PRJ
one.
number is 3508.
Sorry, I'm not sure if I'm capable of actually finding it. Do you know what section that's in? Oh, I got it, I found it. I was just lucky. Okay, right, $750,000 in the current
Yep.
year. Okay. What are the others, if it's easy to do?
Yeah, the Wolf or Washington Street Bike Facility.
Does that, would that be in?
PRJ 002536. I think it's in the Streets and Highways
Yeah, I
section.
was looking for which section it was in, that would help.
Streets and Highways.
Wolf, Washington.
And you may need to refresh your Wix page, but these are all listed out on a PDF on your Wix page. So for the Wolf or Washington one, the Department of Transportation had applied for a state grant. They were not successful with the initial application. I think they intend to modify the application and apply again, but they want to make sure that this project can move forward with or without that state grant. And so what they're showing here is using some of their federal highway administration funds for this project in case they're not successful in getting that grant.
For Wolf, Washington, did you say?
Yes.
That's showing as 4.6
Yes.
million.
And a large portion of that is the need to resurface the street in order to make it
Yeah.
appropriate for adding bike facilities.
I think I refer. I didn't see the list, but
Oh.
I don't mind you going through it, of course. I was just trying to.
Yeah, no, I can, and then the next one is Sharp Street Bikeway.
Yep.
PRJ 003506.
Yep, I got that one.
The next one is Martin Luther King Jr. Boulevard Side Path. PRJ 002529.
Is that also streets and highways?
I think these are all there, and one thing that Stu and I talked about is create a section in next year's CIP that is focused on active transportation.
Okay.
So that these won't be.
All right. Well, I'll look for the MLK one. You can keep going. I'm sorry. I don't mean to hold you up.
And then there's one more. Falls Road at Northern Parkway would include a bike lane. And that one's PRJ 002521.
Yeah,
And that one is funded in 26 and 28.
I also saw a big jump conversion. I don't know if that's related, if that's specifically bike related, or what it means to say big jump conversion. Which is PRJ 2192.
I can look up the.
You can look it up. Yeah, you don't have to do it now. So, all right. I mean, so while we're on this, I just want to ask this question. I had raised this, last time about, why are we not putting money in the out years? And I'm I'm willing to, we should definitely have a conversation with them, and just, rather than trying to do it now, about sort of what the overall planning is for all of this stuff. But let me so ask this narrower question. If there is money programmed in the 2026 year, right? When we get to the end of the year, they will have spent that?
Not necessarily, no.
What would be the barriers to spending it?
So there is a long runway to spending capital dollars, right? So they need to plan for the project, they need to prepare design documents, bid design, do the design, then prepare bid documents for construction, award the construction before like all of the funds are spent, right? So there's a very long runway. So I think it's a reasonable expectation that some of the funding is spent, but not that all of the funding is spent.
And I think you answered this last time, but and the reason we don't say, well, then let's just put it in the next year, is because if you don't put it in this year, they can't do all of the things that you described because the money has to be there in the actual budget, or does it
So
just
they
have to
don't
be
need all of it to do any of those steps, but they need all of it to bid that portion. So you need all of the design money to be able to award design, and you need all of the construction money to be able to award construction. So so we can separate those into different years, but unlike the Charm TP Incubator, which I think we're going to discuss next, which has kind of a very different approach because it's not being bid by a city agency. For city agencies, you need all of the construction funding up front, not kind of when it's going to be spent.
Yeah, I mean, okay, and all that. I mean, I understand, but you know, it's the other side of this can be very misleading coin. Not deliberately misleading. That's not what I mean at all. But it's the other side of the coin that the vice chair talked about earlier, which is you have these numbers that don't get spent. You know, so you don't really know when the money's getting spent. I mean, and we put it in the budget with the idea that we are trying to create an outcome. The money's in the budget to create an outcome, and then a year later, no outcome has been created because the money didn't get spent. And I know there's many different reasons, sliding scale, whatever you want to call it, of why it doesn't get spent. But I guess it's all part of the same discussion, which is, if we're giving you the money, we expect it to get spent, unless there's a good reason that it can't. Mm-hmm. And somehow we have to figure that feedback loop out. And on this, just because I know this program a little bit better than some of the others, to me, what you need to match this up with, and what I would hope they would do when they come in to talk to us about this, is to match it up to an actual project schedule. Because this is just a bunch of numbers and a bunch of dollars. It doesn't really tell you what they expect to do and when. And when I was chairing the bicycle commission, I used to say to the DOT director all the time, here's the sentence that you should fill in. It goes, we're going to use these dollars to do these things on this schedule, subject to these caveats. It's really a simple concept. I know it's not simple, but that's what it is. Tell me what money you're going to use, tell me when you're going to use it, tell me what you're going to spend it on, and feel free to tell me caveats, because that's totally reasonable. That's where I think we need to be, and I just know that area well enough to be able to conceptualize that. I suspect the same concept absolutely works for almost anything you're thinking about, whether it's a single project or whether it's a program. But to me, that's the goal.
Yep.
For everybody.
Scope, schedule, and budget. Yep, that's what we're working towards. In terms of kind of looking at unspent funds, I mean, we're going to do a big process on that, right, later this year. So that's absolutely on our agenda, and looking at balances. But to make sure that happens on an ongoing basis, the goal is to set up a time frame by which there's an automatic review.
Yeah.
So for infrastructure projects, that time frame might be 7 years. For community and economic development projects, that time frame might be 3 years. And we can debate whether those are the right number of years or not, but 7 years is that's what the state uses. It's, I think, a fairly standard amount of time. And that would trigger kind of an automatic.
Like a recapture.
Yeah, recapture unless you can give us a really good reason why not. We are doing other cleanup steps first before implementing that, but that's.
Aren't the CIP transfers just a micro version of that? Because somewhere in the middle of the current budget year, someone says, we're not going to use that money for this thing, but we could use it over in that thing, so let's move it to the thing where we can actually get it spent and used instead of leaving it stuck
It is.
somewhere.
Those are initiated by agencies on an as-needed basis. This would be initiated by the planning department or finance or whomever is doing that process. So I think if we're both doing it from different lenses, then we will have much less, issue with the
I thought when you said 7, you were going to say 7 months. Meaning, I mean, and I'm not trying to be cute, meaning that it seems to me that you have a multi-year version of this, but there's also a one-year version of this, which goes at some point in the year, we're wasting CIP dollars in that category if there is zero chance of them being spent in that year. Shouldn't we be moving? I mean, isn't there a point in which you could say, look, we're 7 months in. Like, has anybody got something you can do with this money quickly? It's like ARPA. It's like an ARPA analogy, sort of, right? It's like we got this money and it's sitting there and it's not going to get spent. ARPA, of course, you worry about recapture by a third party, right? I get that, but you say, well, the clock is ticking. Like, let's redeploy the money. So that's why I joke about 7 months and not 7 years, but some number less than a full budget year.
I think looking at 7 months maybe short, but looking at a much smaller time frame for spending the first dollar makes sense, but not for spending the last dollar.
No, I understand.
So that's what I would say is the difference. Because there are many projects where no one has spent the first dollar even after multiple years, and that just doesn't make sense, right? So.
Yeah, I mean, arguably, just like there should be a point in a calendar year where if you haven't spent the first dollar, that calls for a serious conversation of potential redeployment. It gets squishier, of course, when you're like, well, you only spent 30%. Why? Because I only got this far, and then there was an issue with that or whatever. But if you haven't deployed this precious resource at all by some point in the year, it just seems like there should be some conversation. This is highly theoretical for me, I must admit, but I'm just trying to.
No, I think we are moving in the direction where we can implement something like that. In the past, we weren't able to do that because projects were funded over multiple years. So agencies were waiting until the project had enough funding to move forward. They couldn't spend the first dollar because they didn't have enough money to spend, towards the project. Now that we're going to be fully funding, that Northeast Police Station, once we put $30 million in that project and DGS has a design ready to go, it shouldn't take long. We should see those dollars starting to be deployed in that fiscal year.
Got it. Mr. Vice Chair, did you want to speak?
No, I just thank you for raising this, and I clearly agree. I just wanted to add the nuance that a lot of these projects that the transfers are coming out of are not this year projects. In most cases, they are previous years projects that have long been over, and we realize there's leftover money. Let's now move it to a current need. So it would be great if we could get as fluid as a same year review, and we should treat every dollar with the same urgency that we did with the ARPA money when there was a timeline.
And what's triggering a lot of those transfers is the need to fill a gap on a current project. And so then there's an effort to go find, where can the funding come from? It's not driven by looking at balances in projects and figuring out this one's completed, let's do this. I will say that there's also been a lag with our transition to Workday in terms of closing out projects. So that was something that finance did regularly and will do again, but there's been a gap in terms of doing that. And so that would also help with that review of, hey, there's leftover funds in this project that's finished. Let's recycle them into something else.
And I know you are too, but I'm just trying to bend the curve here. Deputy Mayor?
Tim, one, yes, and I agree with what you're saying. And one of the thoughts I've had, as you mentioned, things to be briefed on by the plan or as a planning commission is thinking about as the planning staff has staffed up with all the directors' hard work to hire people. If there's bandwidth to actually start assigning research projects or get interns or fellows in the summertime to do the kind of work. Hey, what are the best practices for making sure we're spending in the same calendar year? And that's just one example. But I'm sure there's dozens we can think of. Why are we doing more P3s? How do we do better oversight to make sure the cost overruns don't occur? Top of mind. So.
Okay, thank you. Sorry.
No. And that was the last item on the bike facilities and active transportation planning. So the next document that we provided was an update on Charm TV Incubator. So there were questions about that project and the timing of having $600,000 in FY26 and $400,000 in FY27, having all of the funding in FY20. The response that we got was having all of the funding in FY26 wouldn't accelerate the project. They are trying to secure commitments for all of the funding so that they can begin construction this summer. So they need to have the commitments in place, but not necessarily the dollars. They're not going to be spending them all that quickly. So this is an example of a situation where we can budget it kind of on an as-needed basis, and that's what we're doing. The next item is the memo on public-private partnerships. We had shared this previously, sharing it again because it came up again, and that is one of the items that's on our list for future briefing sessions. So those were the ones that we had more in-depth follow-up on. And then we have kind of some quick responses to some of the other questions. There was a question about whether the request for a Mayor's Office of Employment Development building that was in one of the future years, whether that programming was planned to move into Reservoir Square. And it is not one of the programs that would be moving into Reservoir Square. There are several others, but that one's not one of them. There was a question for transportation about whether the city had forfeited federal dollars due to lack of match, and whether that would be something that might happen in the future with reduced HUR levels in 28 and beyond. And transportation has explained that federal dollars are not forfeited, they're banked and can be matched as local funds are available. However, that we would not have enough, with the projected reduction in highway user revenue, we would need $10.5 million annually just to provide the local match for federal dollars, which would be almost half of the projected highway user revenues that would have to be used just as match for those eligible projects. And so then you would have, less available for projects that are not available for federal match, more of our local type projects. I did confirm that the Druid Park Lake Drive Complete Streets, that $6 million was an error. So we're not losing anything and taking that out. It's just cleaning that up. And then we asked about reporting on traffic calming expenditures, and transportation says that they do some tracking. We can follow up and see if we can get an access to a map or a list of projects. They didn't provide that in the initial response. And then the last question for transportation was about tracking bulk projects. Both anticipated locations for things that they're requesting funding for, as well as the locations that actually saw improvements with prior dollars. And they explained that they track different bulk projects in different ways. The next question was for DPW about whether it would be appropriate for the counties to contribute to stormwater, similar to the fact that the counties contribute to water and wastewater. And the response that we got was that it is a very different situation, and that we do receive discharges from the county for the Gwynns Falls and Jones Falls, but the county receives discharges from Baltimore City for the Back River watershed. And there isn't central treatment plants or anything like that that's analogous to the water and wastewater. And then the last section.
I know you're probably just reading, but it doesn't seem apples to apples that the Back River treatment facility is getting run off? I guess because I think the issue I was thinking about for stormwater was that everything's running down towards the Patapsco and the Inner Harbor at some level. So that's where we're getting all the runoff from the county that surrounds us. Whereas what maybe the impact at the Back River treatment facility is just sewage pipe.
Right, this is the watershed, not the treatment facility. So we're receiving discharge into the Back River watershed. And we're receiving discharge from the Gwynns Falls and Jones Falls watersheds. I guess that's the topography, kind of how it works out.
Maybe it's not worth going crazy about it. I'd be curious if it's. I would think there'd be more volume, way more volume and runoff in the Gwynns Falls and Herring Run and Jones Falls versus Back River. But.
I can share more of the response. So I was giving kind of like the top line, but in addition, the state regulations require that any construction activity that that disturbs more than an acre cannot increase peak flows. So in terms of like more discharges from construction activity that's happening now, that should be mitigated already for any construction activity that's more than an acre.
I don't think it's.
But if you're interested in pursuing this further, this response is from Kim Grove, and I'm sure she'd be happy to come do
It's going to be one of those projects.
do a
I
briefing.
recognize we haven't enough juice or even probably require legislation that we don't have the power to implement at the state level, but it's something to think about. If we're getting another raw deal for this structurally about being the center and at the bottom of the hill, basically how the watershed is. So, nothing for you to do, but it was thinking for ourselves to look at.
Yeah, the response doesn't indicate that, and I don't think she would have been shy about telling us that. But yeah, I don't know beyond that. And then the last section of follow up was some topics that were brought up, but there wasn't kind of an immediate question or briefing. We can certainly turn some of these into future briefings. We did add already highway user revenue to the list of briefings. So there were a whole series of questions that we had identified related to that. There was the question that we talked about again here related to budgeting based on spending schedule instead of having the full funding available at the time of award. We talked about how to track spending within bulk accounts, and that's something that we can talk about again in the future. We talked about spending more of our energy reviewing the utilities. We mostly focus on the local discretionary funds and the highway user revenue funds, and because they're not competing with the utility revenues, we have not historically focused on those. But the point was made, that some of those investments might align or not align with other priorities, such as impact investment areas. So that's something that we will bake into next year's process. And then there was a discussion about whether certain facilities should be self-sustaining. And this came up in the context of both BOPA and Recreation and Parks. Did we miss anything? Are there any additional questions? Yeah.
I just have a general question, and it might have came up at the session that unfortunately I wasn't able to attend. Just in reference to the federal landscape, as we look at this request, one of our charges was kind of the degree of readiness for these projects, and a lot of them were based on leverage, particularly federal funding. And so, for instance, this $85 million grant, is that going to happen? Is that at risk of not happening? I know with this particular administration, there's several times where you could have a signed grant, but the grant still be canceled or rescinded. And so the question is, what does that do in terms of timelines, in terms of our expectation of projects, if certain projects are dependent on federal funding? So as you're going through that, didn't know what those conversations are. Is there sort of a risk mitigation strategy, and how should we look at that in terms of our expectations of projects getting done?
Yeah, did you want to answer? I don't think any of us know, right? So we're living in uncertain times in terms of the federal participation in some of the projects that we expected and have received awards for, and ones that we had very high hopes of receiving. But we want to best position the city to be able to receive those funds. And so we've made sure to include the local match for West Baltimore United so that the city is well positioned for that grant. If we get news that grant is not moving forward, then we will make a change, to the CIP and have to take out that $85 million. But we today I don't have an answer to your question, unfortunately. I don't think anyone does.
We can say the planning grant for West Baltimore United is in the bank, so to speak. So that planning process will go forward. The construction grant, the $100 million or the $40 million in our case, is not in the bank. And so it may not happen. However, I think the Red Line's a good example. We've learned that large capital projects that get killed off or delayed do come back at a future date. And you may remember the original light rail line was built in a phased way because they did not have access to the federal money at the beginning. So they began the original light rail project with state money and then expanded it when they got federal funding.
I guess my question, I know it's a wait and see, but is there a way that we can forecast where risks are and somehow getting in front of that, or is it just sort of wait?
I think the higher risk are the ones that are non-formula funds. So if you look at the list for the federal funds in FY26, I don't think there's any guarantees in the current environment, but the CDBG and the Federal Highway Administration and the Home are kind of recurring funds that we receive on an annual basis. The ones that are listed under other federal funds, which is where you'll see West Baltimore United, those are kind of unique situations, and I think those are at higher risk.
I know that, Commissioner Horn, as you can imagine, the city, mayor's office, city administrator has asked everybody to do a risk analysis, like everybody everywhere is being asked to do, right, across, So presumably that exists in some form, whether, in departments, I don't know how much it's bubbled up, I don't know to what extent we're entitled to see it, but sure, everybody's, I know, for example, because I've talked to the folks at DOT, I know that they have done one because they've got all these federal grants coming, and everybody's been asked us, like, how likely, what would it take, and it's the problem with it, of course, is that the regular rules don't seem to apply anymore, right? So like a simple thing, like, it used to be, if it was I forget the verbs, but these verbs have like meanings in law, about if it's obligated, then it never gets cut. Now, if it's I'm making this up, so please, but now if it's obligated, they seem to be willing to cut them, right? And you just kind of walk back, and then things that aren't even obligated, they're really, really, really at risk. So I don't know, and you may know as a cabinet member, the deputy mayor may know, I presume there is some sort of overall risk analysis that's going on some of which is stuff that we would be directly interested in, like CIP-related stuff, some of which relates to who knows what. I mean, relates to, funding for, for operating funding for city homelessness programs. There's nothing to do with capital budget, right?
That's where the risks that I've been most focused on is the operating side. But then on the capital side, I've noted like there's some earmarks for some big projects we're working on. And I've been encouraging us to think through if we can pull down, because I think similarly, I don't know the terminology, but pull down the money and like spend it, front load it, like on spending on infrastructure, kind of the initial work, groundwork or site work. And then that's federal money spent. And I'm sure there's rules about how you spend it, but I mean, that's what we've been encouraging, and that the work is ongoing. But I guess maybe it's something we could.
I think it would be.
It's a moving target, like you said, the rules don't apply. It's like you can research it, but it's like.
I just think, I guess the question, and I imagine Commissioner Horn would agree with me and others would, I think that I think this commission would like to stay in touch with that to the extent that it is reasonably possible. I understand, like, I know at the state, for example, I'll leave the details aside, but there was an announcement of a big cut, and I said, well, I said to the state, are you publishing the list of what that would cut? And they're like, no, because we don't want to call attention to it. We don't, I mean, there are like tactical reasons which are totally legitimate. And I imagine the city has some of the same considerations. And I certainly don't want our interest and curiosity and for this to result in something that could be harmful. But short of that, with that caveat, it would be very useful for the commission to understand as this analysis develops. And, when the mayor, when the CA, when whomever finance is ready to share that. I mean, this is a public forum. I realize that those may not be things that the city is prepared to share in that sort of venue at this point.
So in keeping with one of the items that I highlighted in the beginning about policy changes we made this year, requiring federal or state appropriations, requiring a grant work tag, the grant management office has procedures about kind of what you need to do and what information you need to have in order to get a grant work tag. So that project, although I've included it in the CIP because I think, want to be positioned, I'm not sure that they're going to be able to have a grant work tag assigned for that project. So it may be something that we have to take out or have conversations about. After the Planning Commission makes recommendations on the CIP, as I mentioned at the beginning, it goes to the Board of Finance and the Board of Estimates. Typically, the only changes that the Planning Department recommends at those stages, obviously those bodies can make, whatever additional recommendations they wanted to make. But we do make recommendations to those bodies for changes after Planning Commission, but only changes that are reflecting something that's happened, outside of city government or outside of our work. So, for example, the state budget is finalized after Planning Commission, and so we will reflect the final version of the state budget before it goes to Board of Estimates. And so we've never really had to make those adjustments for federal before, but this year I think we might.
Okay. Yeah, thank you. Okay. So, do you have more?
That's all I have for you. So to bring us back, the recommendation is approval. Near the top of your follow-up page, there is a proposed amendment, and so that would need a motion as an amendment to the recommendations that you have.
We could certainly do this after a motion is made, but just before the motion, are there other questions? Does anybody have other questions about any of this? Any threads you want to pull on, talk about?
Just one question. There was a letter from the York Road Partnership, support of Deweese Park, and just didn't know what we were going to do with that. Is that just forwarded to Rex and Parks for consideration for following, or?
The letter is in support of the funding that's recommended for FY27, and that's included in the recommendations.
Oh,
It's
okay.
not in the budget year. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, well, then we can move to a motion, but before we do that, again, what I'd like to do, Sarah, is to figure out how we can document the issues the commission has raised and is concerned about and follow-ups we expect to have happen, whether they're in the form of briefing sessions, whether they're in the, whatever, you've got to, you have the list. And I don't think that necessarily should be only like internal to the commission and the staff. I think there ought to be some sort of memo that says the commission is recommending this. But the other parties involved in this should know that these are the things that got discussed, and these are the concerns that got raised, and these are the things the commission wants to return to. That it shouldn't just be between you. I mean, it's public, of course, but it shouldn't just be between you and us in terms of like let's keep a file of all the things we want to follow up on. I think the discussion has been very helpful to me, just trying to understand what's sort of learn this stuff, and. I think they're good questions and comments. And, I don't know what form that takes. I don't want to be presumptuous, but if we've had the benefit of this discussion and people keep telling me the value of this is not that in the immediate sense we're making massive changes to the CIP, but rather we're adding value by sort of saying, what about this? What about that? What about this? I mean, maybe other folks would get some benefit from that. So could we think about a way to do that? Does that make sense? And I'll ask this question also, the planning director and the deputy mayor, the process better than we do. I'm trying entirely to be constructive and add value here. I'm not trying to embarrass anybody. I'm not trying to provoke anything, but like this is the discussion we had for, 3 hours the other day and 2 hours today. And I don't want it to just disappear into the ether until next year, the same group of people with maybe some changes says, remember that conversation we had last year? So how do we do that?
If I can make a suggestion, I think there's a number of ways to do it, but last year, maybe for the first time, we provided agencies a follow-up letter after the CIP was approved, explaining kind of the rationale behind the recommendations. So I think it would be appropriate to include in that letter the items that were relevant to that agency from this discussion. Another approach, or maybe it's both, maybe it's not instead, would be to do a memo that has all of these items and share it with the mayor's office and the directors of the participating agencies so that they can see kind of the full list, not just the things that are within, because several of these are interagency items.
Right.
So we can do that as an additional memo in addition to the one that's focused on each agency.
I'd be happy with either or both of those. You should certainly think about it and talk with whomever you need to talk with and maybe figure out the best way to do it. But I'd appreciate if we could find a way to do that. It just feels very thin to me to sort of have all this discussion and then send a recommendation that says we recommend this. Good luck. We've spent time and given some thought, and people can decide if they think that's useful. But I think it's worth doing anyway. So is there a motion? And I think at this point, it really is just a simple motion to approve the recommendations that have been given to us. But I'd be more than happy also to include in the motion, if not the recommendation, that what I just described in terms of some sort of supplemental, memorandum. Is there a motion?
And with the amendments that was referenced.
Oh, I'm sorry. With forgive me.
Yeah, but we'll move with the chair's motion with the amendment to adopt the recommendation, I guess, $500,000 additionally for homeownership incentives.
Second.
It's been moved by the deputy mayor, seconded by Commissioner Jolin. Is there any further discussion before we vote? Okay. Roll call, please.
Robin Allen, still here.
Approve.
Excellent.
John Bullock, is he on?
Approved.
Christine Griffin,
Approve.
Talib Horn.
Approved.
Claudia Jolin.
Approve.
Justin Williams. Eric Stevenson.
Approve.
And John Lariat.
Approve. Ms. Barnelm, I cannot thank you enough for the amount and quality of the work that you are doing on behalf of this process. Not only the current process, but your aspirations and intentions to continue to improve it. It's really a lot, and it clearly wouldn't be happening if you weren't working so hard at it. So I'm really, really grateful to you. Thank you.
Thanks, Sarah.
Thank you all. You really were incredibly engaged in a way that I don't think the commission has necessarily been every year, and so that adds a lot of value to the process as well. So thank you. And if I can get some time on your April 3rd Planning Commission briefing session, we have a package that we're preparing for Board of Estimates that I referenced last time that is going to be a step towards some of the transparency that the commission is looking for in terms of balances and that type of thing. So I'd like to brief the commission, prior to that going to the Board of Estimates.
I don't see why not, other than the just general, that we've got a lot of potential topics, but there's nothing more important than that. So I imagine we can sort it out. Thank you. Let's see. Is there anything else? Is there anything else?
I don't think so, no.
Do any of the commissioners have anything else they wish to raise? Mr. Tissot, have we covered everything from your? Okay. So is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
All those in favor, aye. Opposed, nay. We're adjourned. Thank you very, very much.